The Pre-Med Year, session number 346. Hello, and welcome to the Pre-Med Years, where we believe that collaboration, not competition, is key to your success. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Gray, and in this podcast, we share with you stories, encouragement, and information that you need to know to help guide you on your path to becoming a physician. Welcome to the Pre-Med Years. Thank you for taking some time to join me today. I'm excited to talk to our guest today, Christian Essman, the Director of Admissions at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. Now, I came across Christian when he was promoting his new podcast, All Access Med School Admissions. And I was like, ooh, another podcast out in the pre-med world. I have to talk to this guy. And so I reached out to him and he's like, oh, I know of you and your podcast. I would love to come on the show. And so I'm excited to talk to him today about the admissions process, transparency, which as this podcast is coming out, it was a month ago that I was talking in Toronto to other admissions committee members and deans and directors of admissions about transparency in the process to help improve the admissions process for pre-meds. And so we had a great chat about the admissions process in general for students, and I hope you get a ton out of it. Let's go ahead and jump in, say hello to Christian, and I'll chat with you on the other side. Christian, welcome to the Pre-Med Years. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm really quite honored.
I'm excited to talk to someone high up in the admissions world and another podcaster. But I want to start with how you got involved in the whole medical school admissions world to begin with.
Yeah, thanks for asking. This wasn't my career choice, when I was in high school or something that I wind up in admissions someday, but it was kind of an evolution over time. I too was pre-med at one point, but I ultimately kind of decided when I was in my early 20s, and looking back now, I realized seeing these students now, like I was nowhere near the level of maturity that these kids are. I think about it now, like I don't know that I could ever have delivered bad news to somebody when I was at that age and do it in a very sensitive way, and as you should be doing. So I look back now, like that was a good move. So, but I was always interested in healthcare. And so I worked in some emergency departments for a little while. And then I got involved working with, there's a network of organ procurement organizations around the country. And they're nonprofits and they're partnered with local transplant centers. And their job is to help coordinate donated organs and tissues to local transplant centers. So I started doing that in Columbus, Ohio for an organization called Lifeline of Ohio, doing recovery and preservation of organs and tissue with some transplant surgeons from Ohio State. And so I did that for a few years. And then I was dating my wife up in Cleveland at the time. And so I started looking for opportunities in the Cleveland area and got with the organ procurement organization up here called LifeBank. And I was doing more professional education. Fast forward through that. And I started teaching. I created an elective at Case Western's medical school to teach first and second year students about organ donation and transplantation, along with a transplant surgeon from university hospitals. And so I was working here for a while. I mean, just doing this couple days a week teaching. I'm like, this is a pretty cool place. And I like the vibe, I like the students, the culture. And serendipitously, the admissions office was undergoing some restructuring because the previous dean was retiring and he'd been there for 25 years. And he was kind of the guy who was there every day, all day. And so they created this position of director of admissions. And they made the dean for admissions more of a part-time clinical position, part-time clinical, part-time administrative. And so Dr. Maida is my dean of admissions, and she's a nuclear radiologist at university hospitals. And so she's there most of the time, but then she stops over here. So I'm here full time. And that was coming up on 14 years ago in this coming September. So I haven't worked a day since.
So the pre-med student is picturing you sitting in your office, and when you first take this job, you're like, yes, I want to be the one who crushes the dreams of all of these students. What's the mindset of someone sitting in the office who really has to say no to many more people than they say yes to?
Yeah, it's I That's a good question, Ryan. I frequently tell people there are very few slam dunk decisions in this position. And it's tough. I mean, we have to make judgment calls, and we see there's not a lot of black and white in it. When you're reviewing applications, there's a lot of gray area in there. And you hope that I know you spoke with Sunny I listened to the podcast with Sunny.
I love Sunny.
From Riverside. It was outstanding. And she's just something else. And she said a lot of things. I'm in the car listening, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so right. We say a lot of the same things, just sometimes differently. Mm-hmm. And you hope that when you have to turn down an applicant, when they might have all the things you're kind of looking for, but you just you can't interview 6,000 people. So you hope that maybe they don't get an interview here, but boy, I hope they're getting an interview someplace else. And so it's not easy, but at the end of the day, if it wasn't me here making those decisions, it'd be somebody else.
Yeah.
So it doesn't stop with me just not being here. If I wasn't here, somebody else would be doing it and making those decisions too. So you do your best, and a lot of decisions that we make aren't made alone. We have several screening processes, and a lot of schools do this, where it's not usually a one-man show or a one-woman show making decisions. It's usually a committee or a team of people that are making decisions on applicants.
All right, I want to dive into admissions hardcore, since that's who you are. But I have a medical school interview question for you.
Okay.
Based on your background, should we, to potentially increase the amount of organs available, should we as a country switch to an opt-out organ donation system?
Oh, here comes the bioethical question. Well, some states are in that position that you opt out. Ohio is an opt-out state. And so you have to, if I remember correctly, when I had my driver's license renewed, you have to tell them you don't want to be an organ and tissue donor. Yeah. So some states have already passed that legislation. I can't tell you the ones that don't have it, but I think the motion is, and the precedent has already been set, that it is legislatively been decided that in order to increase organ and tissue donors, this should be something that people have to opt out of, because generally, I think the OPOs have found that it's not a conversation that sometimes comes up at home, but when it does come up, it's usually under the worst circumstances. And when people sit back and think about it and talk about it with their loved ones, they're like, you know what? Dad would have wanted this, or, our brother would have wanted this. And so they have to make the decision at that time, which is not always easy. But most people do go through with it and say, yeah, I think let's go ahead and do this. But boy, it would have been easier with having that already on the driver's license or indicated in some advanced directives that the decision's been made for us. We just want to confirm it with you. We have documentation that your loved one wanted this to happen. We just want to work with you to make their wishes go through with that. So that's how usually the approach goes. So I would say, yeah, I'm all for it, but I'm sure there's some arguments out there that people would say that it should be an opt-in, which it has been historically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm all for opt-out. That was good.
Let me ask the interviewer, how did I do?
Step one, never ask the interviewer how you did.
Exactly. Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, that's funny. So I'm all for opting out. My dad was a type 1 diabetic, needed a kidney, was on a kidney transplant list for a long time. And so I have just some personal bias for that. But it's interesting. The data shows that, human psychology is we're more apt to stick with the default. And so if the default is yes, then the majority of people will do that. And if you have religious or other issues
if you feel strongly against it, you're going to seek it out and opt out.
Yeah. So, all right, that question aside, let's talk about the just sheer amount of applications you get. And we talked a little bit about just kind of that understanding of that you're going to have to say no, but there are lots of great applicants who are applying and maybe they're just not a good fit for your school. Now, we were talking before I hit record about the conference that I was at and talking about transparency or lack thereof from medical schools about the whole admissions process and what you are looking for potentially in an applicant. But more importantly, you talked about kind of the screens, and you were talking more about human screeners. But a lot of schools have kind of the digital shredders, I call them, where you just don't meet cutoffs. There are some schools out there who proudly display their cutoffs. UCLA was in the news recently for upping their minimums. Why do you think schools are potentially a little bit more hesitant on not talking about those minimums?
Let's try to get in the heads of those institutions.
Well, let's talk about Case Western. Do you guys display minimums?
Right. We put all of our stats out on our website for the entering class and put the ranges that are there. I think it's important not just to put the average or median of the metrics, but to also put the ranges so people can see the the breadth with which the incoming class looks like. Now, I wish that maybe we should go a step further, and this may include all schools, that we should not only advertise who matriculated, but also who we accepted, because sometimes that range is even a little bit broader.
Oh, yeah.
So at Case Western, we allow all of our applicants who have a verified AMCAS application. We invite all of them to complete the secondary and really leave it incumbent upon them if they want to continue the process with us or not. It's kind of the customer should be aware they've seen the metrics, and if they want to give it a shot, we feel like we shouldn't tell them no. There's always going to be students that I'm sure the schools that maybe have cutoffs, I bet they get correspondence from some students say, "Hey, I just missed your cutoff. Can I please apply?" I have to believe that exists, because some kids just want to have a shot and say, "Can you please take a look at me?"
Yeah. So I'm a great applicant. I'm just, my stats are a little low.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess on one hand, I can see why some schools do it. I bet they do it maybe from a more of a perspective of, look, this is what kind of our metrics are for students that we look at, and we usually don't go below these. We don't want to take your money.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's more of a cruel to be kind kind of scenario where, we don't want to crush your dreams down the road and take your money at the same time. On the other hand, I could see where you might miss good applicants because they just miss some kind of metric cutoff. And maybe that's sometimes more of your non-traditional students that bring a lot of interesting backgrounds and dynamics to a school or to a learning environment where, you might miss out on somebody like that.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's interesting. I think because of my audience, a large percentage of them are non-traditional students, but also a large percentage are underrepresented minorities, and coming from backgrounds where they can't afford a lot of applications to schools and those secondary applications. And I've just seen horror stories of the fee assistance program and being denied that because my mom had to take some money from her 401k and they counted that as income, even though she always meets that cutoff. And so it's just, it's terrible. But a school that has that data available to let the student know, right? Don't waste your application here. It is cruel, but it's also kind, because then it's another application that they can potentially send to another school. But it's definitely hard, right? Yeah. And there are schools out there potentially, you have the 32-hour rule at some schools where it's like, hey, for the non-traditional student, you may have been kicked out of your first undergrad, but if you've come back and you have 32 hours of credits, we're going to count that as your GPA. Or some medical schools, I know, at least one who I've talked to, I don't think it's public knowledge. I talk about it a bunch, but one school who only looks at the last 20 hours of science credits, right? We're going to calculate your GPA based on that. And we're not going to judge you for stumbling, starting school. We're not going to judge you for having a bad breakup your sophomore year or your mom or dad dying. We're going to look at your last 20 credits of science. And if you've done well with that, we're going to consider you good enough to do well in our school.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so if a school were, again, transparent about that, then the student can go, okay, I have a chance here. Whereas I don't know how much you talk to pre-meds, but the majority of time, the pre-meds are just looking at the MSAR going, okay, here's my GPA, here's my MCAT score. I'm going to apply to all the schools that I'm close to what they call the average. They don't understand that it's the median number on there. And so they're missing a large opportunity to, number one, do a lot more research into the schools. And I want to talk to you about that in a second. But number two, they're also missing out because it's not a full range, right? And I talked about in my talk in Toronto, kind of the box and whisker graph, where it actually shows kind of the low range and the high range of what schools are accepting. And obviously, previous, right, just like the stock market, previous performance doesn't predict future performance, but it's hard.
It's tough. And I think it also comes back just to the sheer volume. I think students are applying to more schools these days than they have in the past. It's kind of like the residency applications now in a way. I mean, so many medical students are just blasting out residency applications just to try to increase your opportunities. Yeah. And
do you think that's a symptom of a lack of transparency though?
For residency?
No, for medical schools.
For medical schools.
Yeah.
Potentially. I guess that it's hard to say. Well, I guess it also depends on, your geography. Where do you live that you need to apply? I think we all know that the students in California, most of them have to apply to a gob of schools out east.
Yeah.
Because there's only a handful of medical schools in the state of California. And then the ones that are around them in the West are a lot of big state schools. Yep. So that's why a lot of our institutions farther out east have a large component of our classes are comprised of Californians, which is great. We love them.
Yeah.
But that I think that those students have to apply to a lot of different institutions. I do a lot of advising from time to time with unsuccessful applicants. And the first question I ask, so where would you apply?
Yeah.
Just to kind of see what they're doing. And sometimes it's just when they give you or show you the list, and you look at their profile and it's kind of like, I wish we could have stepped in a little earlier.
Yeah.
And maybe did you think about, and then we'd like, where are you going to apply next? And so let's talk about some schools to add to that list, or maybe pare down a little bit and look at some other schools and tell them, look, you're not going to get a bad education anywhere in the United States.
Yep.
We're all accredited by the same body.
Yep.
So, that's it. So if you get in somewhere and, you don't, whatever, like just go and don't look back. Go and don't look back.
Yeah. But top 20, Christian, top 20.
I mean,
that's how I get a good career. Top 20.
Right. Well, it's between going to medical school and not. So I think go. If you go look at it and if you get in someplace, go. Don't worry about the bumper sticker. Right? Don't worry. Just go to medical school if that's what your goal is. But if your goal is to go to medical school and go to top 20, 25 or whatever medical school, then you have to know that that's buyer beware.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've talked to way too many students, unfortunately, who want that prestige, and they get there and they're like, oh, I'm miserable. Like the culture here just isn't me. But they
were blind going into, they didn't want to see that probably during their visit or something, but
let's talk about
a cocktail party.
Yeah. Let's talk about that culture and more specifically mission. I think a lot of students, I was talking about how the majority of pre-med students just kind of go, okay, here are my stats. I'm going to apply to all the schools that also meet these stats. And they kind of ignore public out-of-state schools who barely admit out-of-state applicants, but they're like, oh, but my stats match. But students are also ignoring mission, the school's mission. It's something, I forget if Sonny talked about it on the podcast, but it was something we talked about a bunch, either offline or at the admissions summit as well, was, right, if you want to be a dermatologist, right? She's at University of California, Riverside. Don't apply to my school. We don't have a dermatology residency associated with the school. We barely have any dermatologists in the area for you to shadow and network with. Talk about the mission of Case Western and how you're evaluating students based on that outside of stats.
Yeah. At our school, I think nationally, Case Western is known as being a research-intensive institution. And the entire university is. And that's sometimes how we get up on people's radar. And we're the largest biomedical research institute in the state of Ohio. So there's a lot of opportunity here for students who like research, not just in the medical school, but other departments and centers around the campus. But that I do know that sometimes deters from some students from applying to us because they say, well, I don't have research, or I don't have a lot of research or bench research. And I think we're known for that. There's opportunities for students to do research here. They have to do research in our curricula, but you don't have to have it coming in. And so we look for that kind of stuff too. Like if they don't have research, well, what else do they have? And usually the student that doesn't have research experience, they've been involved in something else really in depth and kind of gone deep in some area, or they're a student athlete and they just don't have as many hours in the days as you'd like to do athletics, academics, and all the extra stuff, extracurriculars, and including research. So we try to kind of put all that together. The mission at our university is it's a research bend, but I say that we try to kind of look at that. How do we balance a class? We want to make sure that not everybody who chooses to come here loves research. They know they have to do it and they're interested in doing it, but there's some students who choose to come to us because of the clinical opportunities. And on the other hand, students come to us because they nearly know the research opportunities. So it's kind of a nice balance to try to strike. But we do want to test and make sure, like, they don't say, I hate research, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because then I know you're going to be grouchy for 4 months in your third year when you have to do a research project.
Yeah.
Does that kind of help?
Yeah, no, it does. The one thing that you mentioned that I want to dig into a little bit more is you're not looking for students, every one of them who has done research. And it's something I talk a ton about. And I think a lot of students ignore me when I say it, that medical schools and the admissions committees aren't looking for the 4.0, 520 MCAT. It's not just that. They're looking to build a community of students. And I joke, I'm like, okay, we need 3 jocks, we need 4 non-trads, and you're trying to build a small little village of students, and each one of them brings something different to the table. How do you figure that out as an admissions committee?
I think when you get to the admissions committee point, when somebody's invited, when you get a pool of students that are brought in for interviews over the course of months, at that point, everybody's metrics are in the same range. Like they're in the same area. And, some medical schools blind their interviewers to the metrics, to the academics, because they don't want that bias. Sometimes if you interview somebody and they have a 4.0 and in an MCAT score that's through the roof and they got extra credit on it, you're kind of already almost biased sometimes, just maybe consciously or unconsciously. Say, well, they're not great in person, but gosh, they have great metrics. It's hard to say no,
Yeah.
But so now a lot of schools are blinding interviewers to that because we just want the interviewers to know, like, look, hey, if they're sitting in front of you, we've deemed them, as far as we can tell, to be academically viable at the institution. So you just focus on these things. Don't worry. Don't be biased one way or the other. Or if they would see a lower GPA, they might say, well, I've seen stronger students academically. But sometimes that's not, we feel like we've had other students that have had slightly lower creds. And we're like, they've done spectacular as medical students. So I think to get back to at the time of interview, all those students are pretty much, we've felt like, hey, these are viable medical students. That's how they get the academics, get your foot in the door. It's everything else that keeps you in the game. And so at that point, it comes down to people's backgrounds and the things they're bringing to the table, whether it's their personality or some of their experiences, and it's just, I don't know that we're not, like you said, it's not like, all right, we need 3 people that did TFA. All right, we need a couple Fulbrights. Okay. We need some big MCAT score people. All right, got them. That doesn't work that way. I think once you get into the admission committee meetings, it's less so about their academics and how spectacular they are, but more so, how did they project themselves? What was their presentation like? How did they interact with not only their interviewers, but others on the interview day. And I think then we're getting down to, you mentioned it before, to kind of fit to the institution and to the curriculum as far as we can tell. So it comes down to other things that are a little more nuanced than just the numbers on the paper or the numbers on the screen that we're looking at when reviewing applicants.
Talk about how a student can appropriately communicate their fit to the school. I think a lot of students will say, I looked at all of the school's missions that I applied to, and they just all look the same. And they kind of stop short at that. What is a qualified applicant, somebody who you're reaching out and saying, yeah, we want you? How are they communicating fit to your school?
In a couple ways, I think it starts with in something in the application or some things in the application. I mean, things we value, some of the things we value, and a lot of other schools, we're not indifferent than other schools. We have a lot of curricula now are small group based curricular models. And so you're looking for people that like to play with others, collaborate. And we don't expect that all applicants that we think are going to be successful here have a lot of small group case-based learning in their undergraduate experiences. Very few colleges offer that. But you can glean from their application opportunities where they have interacted and had to collaborate with others and compromise and learn and grow in some of those small group projects or some of the activities they've been involved in where they were on a board or they worked in a group, or even in an employment situation where you're on, if you're working at like Panera and you're on the sandwich team or something those are translatable skills. People shouldn't disqualify them just because it's not medically related. So we try to tease out some of that stuff at the application level. And then at the interview level, how does an applicant kind of show that they feel they're a good fit? Well, it comes back to how the applicant then presents a response to some of the questions and says some things like, I've done my homework on this institution. I think it speaks to me. And you have to do it in a way that's like not too like you're selling a car kind of thing. but just to say I have experience working in small groups, and that's what really speaks to me about this institution. That's one of the things. And I noticed in your curriculum, I did my homework, and you do a lot of just say, for example, there's the research component. I've done some research. I really enjoy it, but boy, I can't wait to do something at a different level when I get to medical school. Things like, so find things in the curriculum that kind of jump out at you that you're really interested in, or say, hey, I noticed that you have a medical Spanish elective, and some of your students go to Peru in the summer. Boy, that sounds great. I have a Spanish background. My chops aren't that strong right now, but boy, I'd love to be able to do that medical Spanish elective and maybe, build my chops up and go there someday. That's really excites me. Or get involved in your community here. I noticed I did some research, and you have a large Puerto Rican population in the near west side of town. Do medical students do any work over there? I mean, you could really, if the applicant does their homework and asks perceptive questions, that can sometimes then help facilitate some of these conversations, or kind of gently interject them in your responses, but with that, again, that balance there where you're not getting too kind of car salesman-y, in a way that's like too disingenuous.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that students
it's not
really
easy.
Struggle with.
Yeah. It's not easy.
Is saying, oh, look at me. Each experience has taught me teamwork and communication and right. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, just tell your story and let the story show that. It's hard. It's definitely.
But I think too, again, it can start at the application level. Some schools, including Case, we have an optional essay on our secondary. It says, if there's anything else that's not captured in your application, AMCAS is very deep and we get your entire life history basically. But is there anything else that's not in here that you want to tell us about? Here's an opportunity. So it's optional. And I know other schools do this too. That could be an option, a place where you can write something about what you've learned so far. I'm like, boy, I keep saying boy. Wow, I'm not from the Cleveland area, but what I've read about so far about Cleveland or about Case Western, I'm really excited. Oh, I have friends that go there, or I applied there as an undergrad. I didn't choose to go there, but it was high up on my list. I'd love to have the opportunity to come back. I hope you take a close look at me. And it says optional, but I got to tell you what, when my kids apply to college, anything that's optional, it's not optional for them.
Yeah.
So it's optional for everybody else, but not you. So I don't think there's not like a game there that we put optional and it really isn't. But if you do have something you want to share, or that's a place where you can go, hey, maybe we don't see in the application that you have a connection to the city, but say, oh, I have family from there. I visited there a few times, really liked it. I'd love to come back. I can't wait to see it, kind of thing. But you could really, and that's another place where you can start to kind of show a genuine interest, because sometimes we're like, I wonder what the connection is here.
Yeah. This person's from Southern California and has never been in the cold at all, ever.
Right. And we get that though, that again, applicants from different geographies have to apply to broadly.
Yep.
But if there is a connection, then put it out there. You know what, Ryan, I've even had people say, you've met Ian, you've talked to Ian Drummond before.
Yep.
He does the Undifferentiated Medical Student podcast. This last year, I had students filling out that optional essay saying, I became aware of your institution because of the Tums podcast.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, Ian. So there you go. I mean, it was kind of cool.
Yep. Yeah, that's awesome. It definitely helps to get some exposure to let people understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your podcast. You've entered the podcasting world, and you are doing something that I want to do, and what you've mentioned other students are trying to do, and that's really to really increase transparency in this admissions world. What was your motivation for starting your podcast, All Access Med School Admissions? Yeah,
thanks for asking. It's something that I've been thinking about for actually a couple years, and it actually started when, just mentioning Ian Drummond from the Undifferentiated Medical Student. He came to me because he was mulling his idea around. I said, we kind of came up with, this would be an awesome show idea to interview medical schools, just to kind of make it, give medical schools an opportunity to have their voice heard. Mm-hmm. And so that took a couple of years to kind of get into a place in my life and with work time, that I could do this. Because as you know, it takes a lot of time to do a podcast if you really want to do it well. And so what I wanted to do is, I kept thinking back. I've been, as I said earlier, I've been doing this now a while, and I've made a lot of relationships and friendships with admissions people from around the country, and they're all so much fun and delightful people and really interesting. And we do things the same, but we do things differently. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to say, hey, let's get on there. Dr. Nobe from Rochester. Let's talk about Rochester. Tell us everything that's cool about Rochester. And then let's talk about how you get in here and go through the process of what the application process is like. What are you looking for? If we can pull it out of them. So I try to pull it out of them sometimes, but sometimes I find my guests are a little hesitant to kind of get too detailed. But those are the questions I'm trying to ask them. Like, hey, let's get some curricular highlights. Tell us what is unique or cool about your school or how it's set up. And then let's talk about, all right, how do you get in here? And what the interview day is like? What can people expect when they show up to your institution on an interview day? What's the interview? How many interviews do you have? Is it scripted? Is it open file? Just kind of get into those kind of detailed things, and then just kind of wrap it up with, what happens after acceptance? What is there anything else we need to know about your institution? So, they've been clocking in a little. I try to keep it under an hour, but I just can't. And then we do some listener question kind of things. Well, let's go over a topic and kind of pound through some answers to some commonly asked questions that I think a lot of pre-meds have, and that I receive on my end, and say, hey, I think this would speak to a lot of people. I'm sure others have this question. Let's kind of banter back and forth about what we think about it. And so far in the few episodes that I have, there's been some themes coming up where a lot of people are saying a lot of the same things. And I hope that as listeners go through each episode, they hear these themes and go, okay, like this sounds consistent. It sounds like consistent advice. Maybe I should stick with that. And kind of going back to
but
what
it's
you
not
said,
what Student Doctor Network says.
Yeah. But what you said earlier is like, you said, Ryan, that you advise students and they're like, they don't listen to me.
Yep.
And what I want them to hear is like, yeah, you're hearing it from Ryan, or you're hearing it from your pre-med advisor, and now you're hearing it from us. And hopefully you can go to bed at night and sleep going, okay, I know I'm making the right decision because it sounds like I'm getting consistent advice now. I also decided to do this too because I know there's a lot of potential applicants out there that don't have consistent advising. They go to colleges and universities that may or may not have a pre-health or pre-med advisor, or they have an academic advisor, but their specialty is not in this whole medical school application process. And so I wanted to try to give, I know, and there's a lot of resources out there. Your pre-med years is a perfect example. And there's other resources like the Careers in Medicine, or the Inspiring Docs that AAMC has. A lot of resources are out there, but just to keep complementing them and to say, here's more consistent advice, and you're getting it from two admissions people.
Yeah. And I hope I would recommend or encourage you to reach out to the NAAHP, the advisors kind of national society, and get them listening, because there was a story recently. I was talking to a student who got her MCAT score back and reached out to her advisor, and her advisor was like, "Oh, you shouldn't apply to medical school this cycle. You need to improve your MCAT." And she got a 510. And a great student, non-traditional student, has been a teacher for several years, wanted to go back and go to medical school, decent GPA, just all around great student who a lot of schools are going to want. And I was like, wow. And I posted it on Instagram. And then I just got a flood of messages from students saying, this is what my advisor told me, or this is what my advisor did. And I was just heartbroken at just so many dreams being crushed by just bad information. And so if we can get, as I keep talking about this transparency, if we can get more transparency from the admissions departments at each of the schools, then that will hopefully trickle down to the advisors at the undergrad level.
And Ryan, that was another reason why it was kind of a secondary reason. Was the first primary was, let's get some more information out to students, admissions people, getting consistent information out to prospective applicants, and then maybe their advisors can start to hear these too. And I did, you saw the email, I put it out on the listserv for that pre-health advisors. But for some of them, because there's always new advisors coming in, and for them maybe to listen to some of these episodes and say, I'm not familiar with this institution, I'll listen to it and learn more about it. That way maybe I can advise future students to say, hey, have you thought about X medical school? I heard a little bit about them. They sound like you and them might be a good fit. But I think advisors have a tough job, and there's always probably some details that we don't know about that are in the conversation or not. Maybe the student that got the advice, maybe their advisor isn't in the pre-health world. They're an academic advisor. And from what they've heard, I mean, we have some situations in our community, a case where some advisors, this is not their primary job. Yeah. It is to help guide students through the application process. So they go with maybe what they've heard and they try to do their best. But advisors have a tough job, and because they sometimes have to give some students a dose of reality, which is, I know it's not easy, and they have to try to encourage students to swing for the fences kind of thing. But so I don't envy their position, because I know they're doing what they think is best for the student. But I get it. There's probably some situations where it just doesn't add up or doesn't make sense. Right. Like your example, it's like, wow, that's interesting. But I don't know. Maybe there's some, it's someplace down the middle there that something was, I'd like to hear what the advisor had to say, or maybe what their rationale was. Right.
Good political answer there, Christian.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's hard. Definitely.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
And they have a tough job.
Yeah. And we're definitely in a generation of students with eighth place trophies, and my mommy said I'm perfect. And so they're dealing with that as well. It's definitely a hard gig for everybody.
And one more thing about that, a lot of them they don't have a big staff. It's like one or two advisors for a sea of pre-med students. And so maybe sometimes they just have to go like, hey, this is what the numbers are telling us. We're looking at the data. This is my best advice to you, is maybe it's not going to cut muster.
Yeah.
But hey, if you want to give it a shot and prove me wrong, then prove me wrong.
Yeah. And even schools like we talked about, California, UCLA every year pumps out the most pre-meds who are applying to school, and they don't have a pre-health office.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Exactly. It's crazy. There's a lot. There are some schools that have the very decentralized advising, and if it's kind of sink or swim mentality, and if you can make it through, like, wow, and I think medical schools, just to know, I think listeners should know that a lot of medical school admissions offices know these things about these institutions to say, well, they come from an institution that doesn't have a lot of advising. You got to keep that in mind. And I think the medical students that are on admissions committees also help bring us down to earth sometimes and say, hey, I went to that school, and let me tell you, like, it is, you're scraping to find consistent information, because there's not a lot of advising. So they can also make it real for us too and go, oh yeah, we need to kind of pull back a little bit and not be so harsh. Good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. So they're helpful to kind of remind us and kind of bring us back into place maybe.
Well, let's talk about a student who may be at a university who doesn't have great pre-med advising or no pre-med advising, or maybe a non-traditional student who doesn't have access to anybody. A lot of students aren't aware that they can, or maybe they're scared to reach directly out to you guys and to your staff to ask questions. Talk about how a student can do that appropriately.
Yeah, well, I'll back up and say there are a lot of great resources. The AAMC has a pretty strong set of resources on their website for prospective students, kind of walking students through a timeline of processes that needs to take place. And there's some YouTube videos and stuff out there. I would start with maybe the AAMC places, and certainly established advising resources like your like pre-med years, that really you've been doing this a while, and it's your information's consistent with other things, with other resources. But then I think if students, they don't know where to reach out to, or they don't have an advisor, you call out to medical schools through their email addresses, their general contact, or call the general number. It's tough. Going back to staffing, I think listeners should know that a lot of medical school admissions offices are small teams. I mean, sometimes they're just 2 staff people in some places, or as high as maybe 6 or 7. Compared to undergraduate admissions, like, they have armies of people sometimes, and with regional advisors, and it's very different. Like, if you were applying from high school to college, you had a regional counselor, you could, like, a point person you could go to. They don't have that for medical school levels for the most part. That it's usually just a bare bones staff. And so sometimes the questions, we can say, oh, let's give this person an advising appointment, or let's just try to answer their question via email. One piece of advice, though, I'd say, if you're writing an email question, say, hey, I don't have any advising, but I have a question. Try to just limit it to 1 or 2 questions. Sometimes I open up some of those emails and, like, your eyes cross. Yeah. It's like, oh, like, here's my 10 questions. And they're really detailed. Like, okay, when I was a sophomore and I was involved in this, it's like, oh my, you can't, we don't have, but sometimes you don't have the bandwidth to kind of pour through that. So I would say keep it to a brief intro and say, you'd be my best friend if you would answer this one question. I would be so grateful. Yeah. And then just kind of stick to that, and then see, maybe the door will open, and then if you do get a response from somebody, I think it's appropriate to reply back and say thank you.
Yes.
And say, hey, thank you so much for your time. It was really helpful. If you ever feel like I have more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. If you ever feel it would be an opportunity for me to talk to you by phone or Skype or something, I would love to have that opportunity. I do have more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. Somebody may, that's pretty cool. Like, that's really nice that they acknowledge my time. And what else do you have to talk about? Send me another question, or let's pop on the phone another week. So I think that's a key point. Just be brief. Don't get too detailed.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's helpful.
It's very helpful. Thank you. So, Christian, all access to med school admissions everywhere where podcasts are heard: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all that fun stuff.
iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher.
All right. Got to get on Spotify.
Google. Yep. I'm on Spotify. Good. Yeah, but I could not get on Google.
Okay. We'll work on that. I'll help you there.
We're a Gmail school, or Gmail institution, Google Apps, and it just our university has like part shutdown. My account won't let me get onto Google Play, so
that's funny.
I'm like, well, we'll stick with the other 3 and hope for the best.
I'll help you with that. It looks like potentially a weekly schedule. What's your plan for releasing so students can be aware of when to expect new episodes?
I think right now I'm looking at every 2 weeks.
Okay.
My limitations are my guest schedules, as I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah.
and then my time that it takes to get this stuff teed up. And so I have some people on the books right now. I would like to do it every week, but I think realistically, it's okay right now in the summertime. I probably could do it every week almost. But once we start getting into July and August, when applications start to roll in and people are getting their last minute vacations in, I think it's going to take me a little bit more time. But this is my new pet project, and the response has been incredibly positive, and I'm very grateful to everybody who's kind of chimed in and listened in on it. So I'm going to keep going, and their stats have helped me kind of get other guests on and say, "Hey, look, this is getting a lot of pub and a lot of traction. You got to check this out." And they're like, "Oh, okay, I get it. I'm in. Yeah, I get it now. All right." So their data has helped me get more guests. So I'm really grateful for the listens.
All right. One last word of wisdom for the pre-med student out there who's struggling, doubtful of their journey and potential to be admitted somewhere.
I would say only apply when you think you're putting your best foot forward. If you're a rising senior, or if we're in the process right now where people that are going to be seniors this coming fall, or could be submitting applications right now, and if it just doesn't feel right, or you're like, "Oh, I wish I don't have this done," or "I wish I had a little more of shadowing or patient-based experience," or something else, like, hold off. This process is far too long. It's emotionally, financially, psychologically, it's a huge commitment. And you don't just want to throw an application out there and say, "Well, let's just see how it goes. And if I don't get in, I don't get in." I'll tell you what, I know those rejection emails and letters hurt. Regardless, with going in on this, you were just like, "I'm just going to see what happens. If I have to apply again, it still stings." So apply when you feel you can really put your best foot forward, because that's what's going to give you the edge, not just kind of a thin application, because that's not going to get through. And so even if you think you have the grades, but maybe there's other aspects of your application, boy, if you had more time, you'd like to shore it up, then take the time. Take the time, apply a year afterward. And so you really want to do this process one time and be done with it.
It's fun. You don't want to do it more than once?
Yeah, boy, it's a great outlay.
It's fun and cheap. Come on.
Yeah. So I think that would be just make sure you're applying when you can put the strongest application in front of somebody. And if that means taking a year or two to do that and enjoy other things in your life before you start medical school, then do that. Because once you get on this train, as you know, it does not stop.
All right, so there you have it. Again, Christian Essman from Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. You can find his podcasts at All Access Med School Admissions, wherever you listen to podcasts. I want to encourage you to go listen to that podcast. He's had a ton of great guests already, a ton of great information that I know you can learn something from. So again, All Access Med School Admissions is where to find that podcast. Hope you enjoyed this show and this podcast. We have more great shows coming up for you. So don't forget to subscribe so you get our podcast every week right on your device for free. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on The Pre-Med Years.
This is MedEd Media.